It was 2019 when Forbes gave this 26-year-old startup founder its most prestigious honor, a spot on its coveted 30 Under 30 list, which is supposed to be a lineup of the world's most promising young leaders, but it's safe to say that Forbes missed the mark on this one. Meet Charlie Javice, who has become known as the Elizabeth Holmes of fintech, a woman who scammed the largest bank in America by convincing them to pay $175 million for a list of fake emails. Y'all, I wish I were kidding. In the last episode in this series, I told you about Charlie's first shady startup, which promised to rid the world of poverty, but whose bold claims were questionable to say the least, and whose widespread press coverage ended up landing her in a fight with billionaire Peter Thiel. Then I told you about her next two failed ventures where she lost $500,000 in investor funds, fired her whole team, and got sued by her co-founder for allegedly failing to pay him. And that brings us to this video where Charlie has come to a crossroads in her career. She's still desperately thirsty for success in the startup world, but too lazy to actually earn it. So what does she do? Lie. This episode, we're untangling the web of deception that Charlie spun after she launched her final business called Frank, the one that JP Morgan paid $175 million for. Even though from the outside, Frank looked like it had this wholesome mission of making college more affordable and that millions of students loved it, in reality, Charlie was baiting the public with BS so she could scam money out of struggling families while conning the media into thinking she was a titan of innovation. But in this video, I'm going to show you why there were plenty of warning signs that Charlie's company Frank was a fraud, and why everybody who bought into it, the journalists, the venture capitalists, the execs at JP Morgan, they all got hoodwinked by this snake oil saleswoman. So get your mugs out, cause we about to guzzle, y'all. Hey y'all, it's Mary and welcome to Guzzle. This episode is brought to you thanks to the generous support of viewers who've joined my Patreon. And on that note, I want to give a very special shout out to my thirsty stans, Nick and Randy. Your support means everything to me. I appreciate y'all so much. In 2016, Charlie Javice is 24 years old when she launches a fintech business called Frank, which was touted as the TurboTax for college money and the Amazon for higher education. Frank promised to make it much more affordable to go to college in the US, which so far sounds amazing because if you want a college education in America, you better come from a rich family or get yourself some financial aid because universities here ain't cheap and it's hard for a lot of families to afford them. And this was a struggle that Charlie acted like she could personally relate to.
How'd you come up with this idea? School's just too damn expensive, and I think going through college, you realize that.
Having been through financial aid myself and knowing that 90% of students depend on financial aid to get through college, it's a really, really big deal.
This idea, viewers, it really is close to you. I mean, when you were about to attend college, you actually considered going to Canada because it was much cheaper.
Okay, let's stop right here because if you watched the last video, then you know that Charlie went to a bougie private high school that cost over $40,000 a year. So I highly doubt that Charlie was stressing about paying for college tuition, but you would not know that from listening to Charlie talk because she doesn't act like she was raised with a silver spoon. She acts like she is the underdog, fighting against everybody else who came from privilege.
The major roadblock, and you might hear it from other female entrepreneurs who are trying to pitch like tampon companies or like underwear, who knows, but male investors just don't know about that whole segment of the market. Now try and take a segment of the market where investors who are usually wealthy, have inherited it or made their money, have zero exposure to FAFSA or the financial aid process.
You have a lot of investors that are typically white men over the age of 50 that are trying to understand a problem they have yet to face.
Frank was supposed to make college more affordable by making it way easier for students to get financial aid, which can feel like a very complex and confusing process, especially if nobody in your family has ever gone to college. It's also intimidating because the first form you need to fill out to even apply for student aid is this long, tedious government form called the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid.
This one form is responsible for determining how much money you as a family are expected to contribute towards your college education.
What makes this form so frustrating is that you need to enter pages of financial details that are super technical with accounting terms that many high school students have never even heard of.
If you read it, it looks like a tax return and a legal prenup put together all in one.
FAFSA. Ask any college student, the federal student aid application is needlessly complex. Not only does FAFSA require a deep dive into the student's finances, but it also requires that for their parents' finances. And if your parents are split, you might not even know which parent to use. Or if one of them remarried, then you might also need your step-parents' info. So it's a lot of work just to fill out this one form.
It's a government form, and that means that it's extremely painful.
You have to go through hours of pain and labor to be able to submit your information.
This is where Charlie's startup Frank was supposed to swoop in and save the day by making this whole messy FAFSA application way more streamlined.
Getting financial aid might seem really, really complicated, but at Frank, we've really simplified it for you.
So how does this all work? So a student takes a picture of their tax returns, then we do all the tax math for you. So no math errors that can put you into very complicated verification, very simple language. We take a flow that might take hours with the federal government, and most students take 4 minutes with us.
Really fast, really simple, really easy.
Now that sounds like a really valuable service for students, from a company with a heartfelt mission to make college affordable for all. And so it's easy to see why Frank says that over 4 million students choose to use it. But I do have one question. How does Frank make money?
Frank is free. How is it profitable?
Frank is free for students. However, schools pay us a lot of money to connect with our students. And so it's a win for the student because they're expanding their financial aid options. It's a win for the school because they're fighting to get students to enroll. And it's a win for us because we make a lot of money doing it.
Wow, it sounds like Charlie is killing it. You know, her business is popping off, she's helping people change their lives, and she's getting positive press all over the place. Billions in untapped college financial aid is up for grabs with this new tool. Meet the woman making quality education affordable for all. How a 25-year-old woman is rebuilding the college financial aid process one student at a time. But it wasn't just media coverage that Charlie was racking up for Frank, because she was also bagging millions of dollars in investor money. Frank announces $10 million Series A. Frank raises $5 million more. Investors are pouring money into Frank, a TurboTax for student loan applications. Reach Capital is proud to back the awesome Frank FAFSA team. Excited about our latest investment in Frank FAFSA, have been searching for this company for years. Finally, an ally for the student in the FAFSA federal aid process. Crunchbase reported that the rapid injection of capital into Frank was probably because the company seemed to be growing like crazy. They said that Charlie told them Frank was adding 2,000 families a day and that 49% of its users were first-generation college students. And those are the kind of incredible stats that clearly impressed Charlie's investors. TechCrunch wrote that venture capitalists have been trying to make money from the higher education market for years. It's a rich target for the clutch of investors that pride themselves on investing in companies that can improve society and that can work to fix broken systems. And a new startup, Frank, is the latest attempt to make a lasting change in the industry. Now, the only problem with this promising investment was that the high growth metrics that Charlie spit out were not true. And in retrospect, there were several signs that Charlie's company Frank was full of shit and that Charlie was a con artist. Let's start with Frank's website, where it featured reviews from supposedly real students, like Anthony from the University of Michigan, who says that Frank got him $8,000 more in financial aid. Except that Anthony is actually a stock photo of a creative man working in a co-working studio. Sadly, it turns out that Beth here isn't real either. She's also a stock photo, and ever since its early days, Frank has been purchasing faces to use alongside its authentic reviews. Next, let's turn to December 2017, which is when Charlie wrote an article in the New York Times. possibly due to the fact that her aunt worked as a reporter at the Times for years, according to Forbes. Now, the problem with this article, though, was that even though Charlie acted like she was an expert on the FAFSA, she got so many facts wrong that the New York Times had to issue a massive correction that was 8 sentences long just to clean up her mess. But despite Charlie's obvious lack of knowledge about the problem that she was supposedly solving, she continued to present Frank as the go-to resource for all things FAFSA. This article even featured a meme throwing some serious shade at the FAFSA office, and in retrospect, it probably wasn't the best idea to diss the US Department of Education, especially when the URL for your company's website includes the word FAFSA, which is a trademark of the government. Turns out the DOE did not appreciate Frank violating its trademark and using its FAFSA name to make money. After all, the first word in FAFSA is free, so it shouldn't cost anything. And even though Frank did let students fill out the form for free, it also tried to upsell them on its paid services. For example, Frank said it would negotiate with your school to try to win you more financial aid in an appeal, but you could just appeal on your own for free. So the Department of Education was not a fan of Charlie's whole operation, and so in 2018, they sent her company Frank a cease and desist letter saying that its website could be misleading by making people think that it was the official FAFSA site. After that, Frank ended up dropping the FAFSA trademark from its URL and put a disclaimer on its site that it was not affiliated with the government. Next, let's fast forward to late 2020 when the COVID pandemic was well underway, and that's when Charlie decided it was time for Frank to launch a new product called Classfinder, which said it could help students find discounted online courses for college credit. Choose from over 7,520 courses. Get up to a 70% discount. Low prices, real college credits, financial aid. Well, this all sounds amazing, especially if you're a college student who is now stuck at home learning on your laptop because the college campuses are shut down because of COVID, but you're still stuck paying the same giant tuition fee as before. That didn't seem fair to a lot of students, and Charlie was ready to tap into their frustrations.
As we know, COVID sent everybody learning online, and that was a first for so many students. Families expected the price to go down. We came up with Classfinder and partnered with hundreds of universities in the US to be able to offer their courses at a steep discount to their usual prices.
On Frank's Classfinder page, it says that they partner with over 130 colleges, and it lists all these schools that they're supposedly working with, but reps from these 2 schools on the list told the New York Times that they had no relationship with Frank and they didn't even know why their courses were listed on Frank's website. So, was Frank just lying about all these school partnerships? What even happened after a student purchased a course from Frank? Would they actually earn real college credit? Would the course really be eligible for financial aid after the student had already paid Frank up front at checkout? Well, Charlie insisted that these courses were totally legit and fully accredited, while warning against those other sites that just offered useless online certificates.
Getting a certificate or getting a badge like you do on Coursera or Udemy isn't really enough when it comes to employment. So it's super important to be taking those transferable credits and not just general online courses.
So, was Charlie being a total hypocrite here? I mean, how could the courses on her site be legit if the schools offering them had never even heard of Frank? Well, I did a little more digging and found out that Frank may have had an indirect connection to these schools through an established online course sharing platform called Acadium. Acadium shared on its site that it partnered with Frank, writing that it collaborated with Classfinder to market its online courses directly to students. And Acadium also appears to have genuine relationships with many of the schools listed on Frank's Classfinder site. Lee University, for example, confirms on its website that it has signed agreements with Acadium to allow students to take courses through its platform. The websites for other schools on the list say the same thing, and while I didn't check all 130 plus of these schools, everyone that I did search on Acadium's site shows up in its course catalog. So it seems like this Classfinder offering from Frank may have actually been on the up and up, but the same could not be said for Frank's other pandemic product launch where Charlie would try to profit off of COVID in a despicable way. See, back during the lockdowns, a lot of students were having a hard time. Students who were learning at home now might not have had access to high-speed internet, or they may not have had childcare if their kids were now out of school. And how were they going to pay for those things so they could actually study if they had gotten laid off from their job because everything shut down?
In the adult learners segment, there were a lot less women who kind of started going back to school compared to men. COVID had a huge impact when it came to financial aid and helping the lowest income be able to afford and go to college at the end of the day.
The crisis made Congress realize that many college students in America were going to need some serious financial help to make it through the pandemic, and so Congress passed a law called the CARES Act that let college students apply for emergency financial aid. Well, after that law passed, Charlie jumped on it ASAP and set up a new page on Frank's website promising to help struggling students get access to that sweet government guap. The U.S. government has approved $14 billion in funding. Frank helps you apply for grants from your school. Aid is first come, first served. Apply now. Now, not only did Frank say that it could help students apply for these grants, but it also said that it could loan them some cash in the meantime, and this was a scheme that Frank had been running since its early days. Get $5,000 of emergency cash. Pay it back when your financial aid comes in. No interest, no fees, ever. Frank can advance you up to $5,000 while you're waiting for your financial aid. When your aid comes in, pay us back. Just pay it back when your aid comes in. Pay us back only when you get your aid. So it seems very clear, right? But despite Frank's bold-faced claims that this loan had no fees ever, on the very same page it said that there was actually a charge of about $20 a month. And if you scroll to the very bottom of this page and you read this tiny light-colored fine print, you'll see that 61 days after the date of disbursement, you are required to repay Frank the funds you received. So I guess so much for pay it back when your financial aid comes in. I don't think Charlie understands how those asterisks work. You can't just tack a little star at the end of a lie and think everything's legal. Now, what made this scam even worse when it came to these emergency COVID grants was that not only was Frank baiting students into thinking they would not owe anything unless they got financial aid, but it was also sabotaging their chances of getting a grant in the first place. See, even though Frank said students could confirm their eligibility for a grant on its site, that was wrong because there were no set criteria since each school had its own rules about who was eligible. Despite that, Frank claimed it would email you everything you need to send to your school to apply for one of these grants when all it gave you was a generic email template to send to your school's financial aid office so they could tell you how to actually apply. All these shady tactics caught the attention of a whistleblower who wrote a scathing blog post about how Frank's tool was giving students false hope, and that led to folks in Congress saying, "Hold up, we did not pass this CARES Act so that Frank could scam students." So they sent a bipartisan letter to the Federal Trade Commission, which is the branch of government that makes sure businesses aren't screwing over customers, and they urged the FTC to investigate Frank for misleading students. And y'all know that if there is bipartisan support for an issue in this country, if both Democrats and Republicans think that Frank is a scam, it must be true. Anyway, after the FTC gets tipped off about Charlie's COVID cash grab, it sends its own letter to Frank, warning the company that it was violating multiple laws, including advertising laws that say you can't lie about what you're selling, and lending laws that say you must truthfully disclose the terms of a loan. The FTC basically told Frank in its letter, you better stop acting like a fool or we're gonna come after you in court. And in the meantime, it posted this press release calling Frank out to the public for acting shady. Unfortunately, though, not everybody subscribes to the FTC's newsletter, and so there were a lot of college students who never saw this warning. Somebody posted on Reddit about using Frank to apply for one of these grants and said, "Has anyone heard or done this? I just did it because my dad heard about it on the news, but I'm not sure if it'll work or I will get anything." And someone replies, "I Googled this. Looks like nonsense to me." But another user said, "It's not a scam. There are hundreds of news articles about it." And it definitely seemed like there were. Even if Charlie was awful at being an entrepreneur, she was an expert at sweet-talking the media. And all those articles made students believe Frank when it said it was trusted, protected, dedicated. Charlie said that within 5 days of Frank launching its COVID grant page, more than 100,000 students had completed the form. She also paraded herself as an expert on these CARES grants on every TV show that would have her.
I'm curious, how did that CARES Act money filter down to students, and then how does that affect your business?
I think that's a really controversial question when it comes to how CARES money was spent, because when it comes to transparency, it's oftentimes really challenging to get to see things in real time. You might get it years later when it comes to higher education.
Wow, so Charlie is basically suggesting that it is the schools and the government who are not being transparent about these COVID loans. And meanwhile, she is straight up lying on her website about them. But sure, Charlie, it's the government who's being shady.
So when it comes to higher ed, unfortunately, our government isn't pro-student. So they look at us and they go, wow, these are our competitors. Let's not help them scale.
Oh, Charlie, is Frank not scaling? Are you at the head of another failing business? Well, then it must be the government's fault that you're having trouble, not the fact that you're conning students with sketchy loans, which again was something that Frank had been doing long before COVID. Back in 2018, Business Insider reported that Frank was already offering cash advance loans up to $5,000 while students waited on their financial aid applications. And somebody who used to work for Frank told the Daily Beast that she was assigned to hunt students down on the phone to try to collect the debts they owed. She said it was kind of pointless to even be harassing people for money back, but that's pretty much what I was doing. So just to recap here, Frank was supposed to help students get financial aid so they could afford to go to college, but in reality, it repeatedly baited them with false promises so that it could saddle them with debt through predatory loans. And if by this point you don't already think that Charlie Javice is the human definition of hypocrisy, then just wait, because it's about to get way worse.
So your company's called Frank. What's the name behind that?
So when you sit down and ask people who they turn to for financial advice, what do they usually say? So for the demographic between 18 and 26, which was our main demographic and also one that I'm a part of, it's always some crazy uncle. Frank seemed to be really fitting for that. We wanted something to be super approachable, very friendly, somebody that can also speak with authority. And in the student debt world, there's a lot of corruption, a lot of, squeamish things that are happening, and we wanted it to stand for honesty.
There's a lot of bad press around student debt. There aren't many good actors in the space.
And I think at the end of the day, what really mattered was the student and the fact that no one's advocating for them, or that they don't really have an ally in this financial aid process. Banks are out there and they're lending because it makes them a profit. Then universities are out there kind of like filling airplane seats where it's yield management. And then the government is subsidizing this whole thing, and no one's really necessarily asking questions.
And we just wanted to stand for something that was honest, that was transparent, and where people can really feel as if they have someone who's got their back.
Child. Anyway, so
we align ourselves 100% with the students. We don't get paid by anyone else other than the family.
Schools pay us a lot of money to connect with our students. It's a win for us because we make a lot of money doing it.
That's suspicious.
It is suspicious. It's bad enough that Frank was scamming its customers while Charlie insisted that her company was the only ally they could trust, but it gets worse when you consider the types of customers that Frank targeted.
We are working with an underserved group, minorities, where we serve 40% of them, first-generation Americans, and then you also have a huge element of military and veterans that make up this population too.
Great. Let's have Frank serve the needs of these groups who often already face enormous challenges when it comes to education, and this was a reality that Charlie used to her advantage.
4 out of 5 Americans say they can't afford college, but access to financial aid can change that. If I never got financial aid, I would have never made it to the NFL. As a high school senior, I was unfamiliar with the process of transitioning to college, let alone applying for financial aid.
College is important, even for a professional athlete. I got to college thanks to financial aid. You can too.
The Pistons are partnering with an organization called Frank to help you file FAFSA and get financial aid for college.
Fill out FAFSA financial aid form on withfrank.org. You owe it to yourself and your future. Share this video if you think all Americans deserve the opportunity to afford college.
If you look at demographics, I think for specifically financial aid, the empathetic point is I'm really scared. I have no idea what I'm doing. I need your help before I even get started.
And I thought, where can you have the most impact before someone actually has their life trajectory for a lifetime in debt? And that's where Frank came to be, because we intervene before someone gets into trouble, almost like the healthcare industry and how preventive healthcare ended up changing medicine.
Yes, Charlie, you are really transforming an industry. I mean, Frank is a movement to protect students from debt. Girl, please. I suspect, based on everything we've seen so far, that Charlie wanted her company, Frank, to have first dibs on this fresh meat before any of the other vultures in the financial industry had a chance to take a bite out of them.
The amount of student loans has skyrocketed. Right now, it's at an all-time high, $1.5 trillion in student debt. That is more than credit card and auto debt combined.
It's the largest investment that someone's likely to make in their lifetime, maybe even over a mortgage, and that's kind of trending for millennials today.
And she's right. A lot of millennials aren't getting mortgages because most millennials can't afford to buy a home. This is because when you look at this skyrocketing line here showing how much home prices have shot up over the years, compared to this pathetic little line down here that shows how much our incomes have gone up in the US, you can see why younger generations are absolutely when it comes to buying a house. And that's not great news for banks, who have historically made a big chunk of their profits from giving people home loans. But now, thanks to the housing market and the fact that rich CEOs don't want to pay their employees a living wage because they'd rather build $500 million super yachts, mortgage demand has dropped to a 22-year low. So now we've got a situation where people need more money to survive, so they need better jobs, so they need better education. The good news is that more and more Americans have been earning college degrees. The bad news is that all that higher education has come with a giant price tag because the cost of college tuition has risen by 1,200% since 1980. And I know this sounds like the most depressing economics lesson ever, but the point I'm making here is that I can't help but wonder whether Charlie saw those sky-high tuition rates and thought about all those college students aspiring for a better life in the middle of an economic shitstorm in America. I wonder whether she wanted her company, Frank, to be the first to bat at selling them a loan. She was happy to let Frank swoop in and tell these students, "Hey there, I am trusty old Uncle Frank. I can help you afford the school of your dreams. Just look how much money I got Anthony, who I swear is a totally real person."
There's $40 billion today left on the table each year that students are missing out on.
Is it 40 billion or is it 3 billion that goes unclaimed every year? You know what? It doesn't matter. The point is that Frank sold students the dream of scoring serious cash to go to college using its super fast, super simple FAFSA app.
It takes you only 4 minutes and potentially $30,000 that you could have in your pocket. So file FAFSA with Frank starting October 1st.
It's really an irresistible pitch when you hear it. Apply for free, wait for the money to roll in. Matter of fact, don't even wait. Why not apply for a cash advance? Plus, Frank could not only make money from these sleazy loans, but it could also make bank by selling the precious personal data, not only of the students, but of their parents too.
So what we do is we allow you to invite your parent to do it safely and securely. Your parent, if they don't want to share their tax information with you, can obviously just submit it. It's locked, and kind of that's the end of it.
Yeah, you don't want your kid all up in your business and knowing how much money the family has and spilling that tea all over the neighborhood. Instead, give us all your financial info because we'll keep it totally safe, we swear.
So we use the backbone that 91 of the top 100 banks worldwide use in terms of security infrastructure. And the other thing that we promise in terms of a company is that we will never sell your information.
Reasons we can share your personal information for non-affiliates to market to you.
So it's completely safe. It's something that we don't profit on.
How does Frank make money? Frank partners with schools to match them with prospective students.
And it's something people feel confident that we handle with a lot of dignity and respect.
At With Frank, if someone uses my email address to register on your website, why do you ignore the request to remove it? You would think that privacy in such a financial matters would be of high concern. So by now I think we've established that Charlie is a shameless, greedy liar. We've been through a wealth of evidence proving that, but Charlie's going to cover all that up and trick the media and investors into singing her praises more loudly than ever. You're a role model, Charlie. Here's hoping current and future generations of entrepreneurs find the same passion and drive that propelled you to where you are today.
Charlie, I'm officially in love with Frank. I think it's a great company. I think it's awesome. I love what you do. I love how many people you help.
A value-driven visionary, narrowing social gaps, providing access to higher education. Go Frank! Charlie and her team at Frank are creating a fair financial service and solving a legitimate need. Decorating my classroom with some inspiring young people, including with Frank CEO Charlie Javice. Not many company founders can credibly toss around the phrase $7 billion, but Charlie Javice, the 26-year-old founder of Frank, can. Actually, Forbes, I am not so sure about that because when it comes to Frank's numbers, Charlie seems to be a little fuzzy.
So your company, withfrank.org, is about 2 years old. You've already helped about $7 billion in funds.
That number is correct. We have helped 300,000 students get access to financial aid by filing FAFSA with us.
You sure about that, Charlie? You don't seem so sure. So let's get some more information from Frank's Twitter. In February 2021, Frank tweeted it had served over 4 million students. Then less than 3 months later, it was over 5 million families. And then the next month, it was over 6 million.
We have more demand than we're able to handle, and so we're staffing up, and it's wonderful to see a company grow from a strong foundation. And I think when you do something that has, is mission positive, you do end up making a business out of it.
Now this is weird because this video of Charlie flexing about Frank's growth is from 2017. But the next year, she tells Forbes that the biggest challenge Frank was facing was scaling, which is confusing. Are you having trouble scaling or are you growing like crazy? Well, this is a question that Forbes magazine did not think to ask Charlie. Instead, it decided to put her on its most prestigious list of rising business stars, the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. This is a list where Forbes looks at a bunch of different industries and for each one, picks the 30 people with the biggest egos. No, excuse me, the biggest impacts. If we scroll down in this list, we'll see Charlie in the category of big money. And I didn't even know big money was a business industry, but apparently it's for people building startups with $15 million or more in funding. So I see, it's for people who have tricked investors into giving their company a lot of money, whether or not they're profitable. But sure, they're business all-stars. And look, if this is what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur nowadays, then Charlie was at the top of her game because by April 2020, she'd raised over $20 million for Frank from investors. And meanwhile, is it just me or does it feel like she's straight up trolling them with this first course listing on Classfinder called Advanced Fraud Investigations and Forensic Accounting? It just feels like an Easter egg to me. But honestly, y'all, this $20 million was chump change compared to Charlie's next money move because she was about to con the country's biggest bank into investing a ton more money into her sham of a startup. And that brings us to our next episode. Coming up, you're gonna see Charlie pull her biggest scam yet. Not on naive students, not on a puffy news magazine, but on the most powerful player on Wall Street, JP Chase. And instead of being extra careful about the details of her scheme, you won't believe how little effort Charlie puts in. She's gonna leave a full digital trail leading back to a sketchy accomplice. And after she dupes JP Morgan into paying $175 million for her bogus company, the truth's gonna come out, shit's gonna hit the fan, and this cheating con artist just might finally get what she deserves. So if you want to see that in the next episode, then you can find a link to that video in the description or in the end screen coming up. And I also want to know, what do you think of Charlie's fakery? And do you think that the media and investors should have seen the warning signs before they promoted her? Let me know in a comment. And also, since you made it to the end of this video, add the hashtag empty mug to your comment. And if you want to give this video a like, then I would really appreciate that too. Also, if you want to see more videos like this where I investigate scammers and schemers, then subscribe so you can slurp up all the tea I'm spilling here on Guzzle about shady moneymakers. Alright y'all, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.